That. Okay, great, cool. Yeah, I probably have too many slides, but it's a long set of essays, so it was hard for me to pare down, but we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so I wrote this series of essays, 6 essays, published them this summer. Generally stuff I've been thinking about for a few years. And my guess is that the group here, the crew here, anybody who's an audience member or watches in the future, they're probably going to tend to agree. I guess I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's fun to discuss the ideas, and the general idea is not necessarily to say something new, but just kind of create my own articulation of some of the things a lot of us are thinking, and hopefully some of the ways of articulating it helps the idea stick in someone else's brain too. Yeah, traditionally in my career I've been a urban planner, which is kind of a field defined by, it's called urban planning, like you're planning for somebody else. It's not and that's kind of the mindset of the profession, is like to be a professional planning for people who aren't as good at that kind of thing, who need a little help to make the community better. And slowly my mindset, that's not explicitly stated, but that's the attitude. And in the past years, my mindset has changed to understand that things work best when people do them, have a local tradition of doing that thing, not planned by a professional. So that's kind of my angle on this series of essays, basically. And so I'm thinking about physical place and the traditions and kind of ways of relating to each other that can make our physical places healthy, and don't depend on some outside force to plan for us. So this is a basic summary I'll try to quickly run through, but the main idea is that affectionate relationship between people and places is the bedrock of a healthy society. So places that maintain local agency, and then they can propagate these interpersonal relationships over generations, are the most healthy, but they fail when instead of that interpersonal relationship, there's a prosthesis of institutional processes that make people kind of detach. And without this continuity of placemaking and relating to each other, we detach from our economic habits, our habits of treating the place well, and that introduces a lot of risk that we're seeing play out today in the world. And my assertion is that we can use technologies and tools to help shed the prosthesis and have more direct and affectionate control of our places, local control of our places. So that's kind of the idea of building a community memory that can sustain us, rather than dependence on outside institutions to sustain us. This is kind of, I guess, like a drawing of that, but you get empathetic relationship to each other in our places. This produces agency and limits and balance. So agency to act and be your own actor and feel control of your place, but also limits that don't overuse resources. You get that in balance with empathy and relationship, and then those reinforce each other. So over time, this cycle is like time is a huge element of this, the tradition of this process. That's what I would call community memory. And then the essays go on to talk about how our tools, and specifically community computing or blockchains, can support this. So here's kind of like a little snippet, or like juxtaposition here of kind of the ideas I'm talking about. So On one hand, we have the Aral Sea, which is at one point the fourth largest lake in the world. Now, as you can see, the image there is, I'll loop it again, but completely basically dried up and doomed and irreversible, because of, an institutional top-down engineering decided, we can use this lake to grow cotton in the former USSR, and we can grow a lot of cotton. And they did that very efficiently for a while, but it was kind of like, it's a one-way transaction. We get cotton and we destroyed the fourth largest lake in the world. And then if you take that in comparison to traditional Nepalese water management and dams, this anecdote comes from the research of Eleanor Ostrom. But so she went and researched their traditional dam management between villages, and that is used for agriculture, and found that they have, traditionally there were primitive dams, literally just like sticks, a lot of times, and mud stuck together, very small scale. But the government went and got a bunch of grants, and then they hired a bunch of engineers, and they said, let's replace these dams with modern dams that are better engineered. And it turned out that a lot of those dams, the total crop yield for those dams was much lower, because the villages no longer needed to cooperate, and they didn't have any kind of ways of interrelating, of forming empathetic relationship with each other. And so they overused the resources. The users on the other side of the dam could use all the water without talking to the users further down the river, because they no longer needed to cooperate. And so overall, you had a more efficient dam, but you had a less efficient or less effective social process. So it's kind of like the ideas that I'm getting at in this. And I actually recently, like a couple hours ago, saw a tweet about why is James Scott's Seeing Like a State, like why does everyone in Silicon Valley like it? So I think so I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ideas in it, maybe, but when institutions that are far away need to manage something, a small thing far away from them, they need to make it legible to them, and predictable, and measurable, because that's the only way that something distant can understand a local place, is through numbers. So there's this anecdote and Seeing Like a State about scientific forestry in Germany, which, so this is not the best quality photo, but you have obviously less tended to, but in relationship with people, forests that provided wood for all kinds of uses over generations in Germany. And then when the state chose to introduce scientific forestry and said, we can do forestry more efficiently, and they did, then you did get efficiency for a couple of decades, and then you got what we know is the outcome of monoculture in biology and in ecology. And so today, even still, there's a lot of consequences in Germany of that ecological imbalance that still haven't resolved. So just another, I guess, example of when the drive for legibility isn't, there's a lot of unintended consequences. So, and when you have this entity outside your community, be it the state or the federal government, you take on kind of this role of the consumer, which is a familiar role for Americans, which I'm American, so this is my perspective. Familiar role for Americans, especially me. I'm in Florida, so that's like one of the most, I would say, consuming states. Maybe that's all of our restaurants are chains and from somewhere else. But so you get this generation of planners creating for customers, and you get people who um, forget how to make a place themselves. So this is kind of like the cycle. You have people who depend on outside institutions and institutional decision makers, and you get disengaged people. And when you disengage, you forget kind of like the traditions of how your place came to be and how and how to take care of it. You forget the anecdotes of how to relate to the ecology your grandparents had, and then because you lost that knowledge, you become more dependent, and so it's a cycle that puts you in a precarious situation, because that's kind of like the cycle that happened in a lot of small town America, where um, you know Walmart came in, and that local economy was made more dependent on this distant institution of Walmart. And then if that Walmart decides to close, then there's no longer the small shops aren't around anymore, and so you don't hopefully you would get a small local people to step in and take the role again, but mostly those people have forgotten, and they don't know how, and you just have to drive a little further to the next Walmart. So that anecdote is, as I said, my perspective is kind of from urban planning perspective, and so I'm thinking about places, and so I just wanted to note that it's important to think about community memory in the context of a place, not just because we're physical and we have to be in a place, but because physical places change very slowly, a lot slower than social process, or most of our cities probably look a lot closer to the way they did 30 years ago, whereas uh, the internet was not something that most people used 30 years ago. So there's a big difference. We need to be pretty careful about how we change places, and we need to take great care with them, because they're going to be around. Whatever choices we make are going to be around for our children. So in the physical space, especially. So we can do that. And we can do it joyfully. I think there's a great book called "A Palace is for the People" by Eric Kleinenberg, and he frames it in terms of social infrastructure. So this is like physical infrastructure that helps embed social relationships into our daily lives. And the reason that he came up with this term was because he studied I think it was 55. Big heat wave in Chicago, and he found that neighborhoods, accounting for poverty and all other social things that may have said one part of the city should have worse deaths, higher rates of death from this terrible heat wave. The thing that stood out amongst that was that despite those any other like socioeconomic factors, if there was a social infrastructure, there were libraries, there were shaded streets, there were street vendors who sold on the sidewalk, and there was a way of getting to know your neighbor, then those neighborhoods had lower rates of death, because the neighbors checked on each other and they made sure each other were safe. Whereas people who had lower habits of relating to each other in physical space died more often during that heat wave. So building our community memories into our physical spaces is an important thing. We can't just build like a another governance like voting framework on Ethereum or something, it has to, you know, there needs to be some physical impact as well. Okay, so that's just like that's the first section. Then we're going to talk a little about agency. So I will talk about what, I guess, like what institution or like local organizational structures might look like that have a lot of agency or that grant agency. But I guess first I'll also discuss institutions, far distant institutions like state and federal governments. They can hold a lot of power, and there's even local city governments. There's a lot of complex regulatory processes, and so oftentimes community building is only accessible to people who understand those processes or are well capitalized, or well connected enough. So, and then this is my experience having been in relating to city government a lot in my profession, is that a lot of the community meetings or community engagement is kind of half-hearted. It's just is relaying information. It's not engaging, and it's not a process of people planning their own city. It's a dictation of how the city will be changed. And then at the bottom here I have this kind of like scale from that style community engagement is just informing, then to open protocols that people can, which I know some of you guys have been discussing, like that idea of an open protocol that anyone can participate in, and anyone can make physical changes to their city with their neighbors. That's kind of like the scale that I'm thinking on. And then in the middle, even I think probably what tech companies probably do even better than local governments and state governments is this idea of the platform. So if we can't move to protocols, I think that we should maybe at least move in the direction of the platform, which is kind of that idea was introduced by Steve Yeage's famous his famous rant, where basically he says, you know, he previously had worked at Amazon, then moved to Google, and he said Amazon got this thing right that Google can't get right, which is the idea is basically that Amazon lets everyone sell their own books. You know, Amazon didn't try to buy all the inventory and sell all the books in the world. They said, we're a platform for people to sell books, and obviously it took off from there and has a life of its own. I'm not saying Amazon is the world's greatest organization, but organizations like Amazon, YouTube, Apple App Store, they all operate kind of as platforms for individuals to use, and that has made their reach stretch much farther than if they tried to create all of those products themselves. And now the difference is there's a ton of censorship involved with those platforms. It's extremely difficult to get anything on the Apple App Store, and there's a lot of problems. They can make anything that you put on disappear. YouTube could make this talk could end up on YouTube, and then it could disappear for no reason. So for all those reasons, I think that we should move towards protocols that are community owned, but that's kind of a scale to think on. And so then how can we, if we have these distant institutions that may or may not give up control, what are some other architectures for planning beyond this central institution? And working back to what some of Eleanor Ostrom's research on polycentric organizational structures, that's kind of that's I think which I'm sure many of you have I've thought about this is not a new idea, but here's a kind of graph of micro solidarity, which is a great organization kind of discussing how to hook up a polycentric system of governance. So you have, you work out from the individual or a crew of 5 people, and they have sovereignty amongst themselves. And then if they network into groups, several groups, then that you might call that group a congregation. So yeah, Michael Levin is uh, brilliant, obviously. So what he calls this architecture is multi-scale competency architecture, and I recommend watching some of his videos, obviously reading some of his research. But he describes actually like just the human body in the same way, which is each organ or each cell even is a center of autonomous local problem solving and solving its own problems. And then when you aggregate these cells into organs and the organs into the body, then you get this self. But that is not, the lowest denominator of the lowest unit of consciousness in the body, according to him, is not, it's each of your parts has some autonomous local problem solving. That's how biology works. That's his assertion. So that's kind of how I'm suggesting that, a good alternative to central planning. Keep moving. So then, like, I guess I have just a couple examples of how agency works at the local level, like what it looks like. And that would be that there's space for dialogue. So more of Eleanor Ostrom's research, but there's kind of a justification for institutional intervention a lot of times is that people are going to overuse resources. They're going to as even in the case of the Nepalese dams, the modern Nepalese dams that were resources were villages became in competition with each other when they didn't need to cooperate. That's kind of the impetus for the tragedy of commons. So people are going to overuse resources and they're not going to be fair to each other. And in her research, Eleanor Ostrom found that is the case, but if people are given the chance to cooperate, and if they have systems for cooperation and dialogue, they don't overuse resources. And in fact, they usually outcompete a professionally engineered system or an outside institution. So agency looks like just being given the chance to dialogue with your neighbors, and often that's all we need. And then also having spontaneity and informality. Those are things that distant institutions can't really provide, but they leave space for breakthrough thinking, the kind of breakthrough thinking that I think, that's one of the reasons that people who are given space and given trust can outperform, maybe a rigid distant engineer, is because you become in relationship with that thing, and you become connected to it, and you have empathy. So this is one of my this is a fun example, I think, from the world of urban planning that people talk about, is that this William White in New York City, I think it was in the 70s, but this is specifically Bryant Park where they did it for the first time, but this was kind of unheard of, is they just set up chairs that people could move around. And people say, everyone's going to steal the chairs. New York City is not a safe place, and that's not okay. But people didn't steal the chairs for the most part, and they felt happier there because they could just move the chair just a little bit, and then they felt ownership and they felt more comfortable in that place. So just these small extensions of trust between a place and a person allow people to care more about a place, and then to care better for a place. better than a dissonant institution. So I think that spontaneity and informality are super important. Um, okay, and then so yeah, we talked about how this a community memory, it builds this those agency, ability to act on your own and act freely and act joyfully. It matches that ability with limits. So things that make our society more resilient as well. So when we have outside dependencies, when we're relying on outside institutions, um, as we know, we have a lot of unforeseen uh, consequences of our action. And that's because in a globalized economy, the consequences of your actions are outside of your community. They're outside of your physical life. And the term for that is called psychic numbing, in that we're like psychologically unable to care as much about places uh, that we don't live and that we don't know people in. Um, and so if you have, that's, I think my simple, maybe hot take is that if any globalized economy is going to tend towards decay, because you have a system of people uh, creating consequences of their actions that they can't see. Um, so then obviously all of those decisions cascade into what we have, I guess people call it the poly crisis today. Um, we have that, and I'm not saying you know, I found the answer, the solution, but I think that the reason that each of these cascading, consequences of our actions are snowballing and why they exist today is because we have distant economies, and you know we we don't have any relationship to our economies. So this is a crazy example, I think, is that uh, maybe some of you live in California, even the Central Valley, but it there's a high percentage of our country's agriculture comes from this part of California, and 80% of their water from the aquifer goes to agriculture, and so they've been overdrawing from the aquifer for decades. And so in the last, can see these photos in the last 50 years, um, the the ground has literally dropped out from underneath people a significant amount. So that is not something that matters to me. I don't know, like personally, that's hard to care about when I'm choosing which, like strawberries to buy. And not even hard to care about, but I don't even know how most people aren't aware of that. That's not priced into the price of the strawberries, but um, here it is happening. So that's kind of, I guess, an example. And then these trajectories, even when you can foresee them, or you can see them happening, like we see the ground dropping out from under people in California. You it's Often these trajectories are explained away because historically, we've kind of been able to grow ourselves out of them. Like we'll just um, make so much money that it doesn't matter, or like we'll invent this new thing that solves that problem and kicks the can down the road. And so people actually are in the habit now of just saying, it doesn't. Yes, we are causing this terrible problem, but something that I don't know what it is, something in some future generation will solve that. Um, and so that's fine. I mean, in some cases that may be true, but in general, that attitude is you're just creating a habit of pushing debt on a future generation, and at some point, my opinion is that the future generation won't be able to pay that debt. And so I think there are better ways of organizing society. This is just an example of a lot. This happens in physical space a lot, and and will continue to happen as basically outdated suburbs go bankrupt. But there's a ton of forgotten malls across the U.S. And even neighborhoods that had an economic role at one point, and then they couldn't rent out their space anymore. So it's just better just to leave the entire mall, the entire block in a state of decay, or the entire town in a state of decay, and move on. Um, and eventually, we're gonna run out of space. So to do that. So then, I guess in juxtaposition, then you have limits driven and empathetic relationship, and they look like this system over here, which is from this interesting book called the circular thermodynamics of organisms and sustainable systems. So you have kind of this closed loop of energy where it requires some, but this whole system doesn't require a ton of energy input, because the system is matched in relationships. So it's kind of like the social way to talk about it is that you have these empathetic relationships, and they don't cause decay as much as our boom and bust economies. So obviously, this whole idea kind of it 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 plays out through time. So this kind of relationship through time, it can mature, kind of like a forest, and you have it playing out on. It's kind of like I would call it a temporal polycentricity. So you have things happening, on the daily scale, but you have this system maturing over centuries and millennia, and that is kind of the model, I think, for a system that limits risk and is more resilient. So I related, I think, anecdote that how I would explain why or how institutions are not very good at relating to those kinds of systems is in the world of mezcal, which I'm not Mexican, and I'm not so I'm not necessarily an authority to speak on this, but this is my understanding from having visited Oaxaca. And more than most alcohol products, more than most definitely, most things that you can find, most bourbons or whatever traditions of alcohol making we have in the US, that agave distillates are produced historically by small families in small batches for that village, by a probably extremely local variety of agave, and so then you end up with this local taste. That each village has their own tradition of creating this agave distillate that you can literally taste. So most so then you fast forward, I guess, into mezcal is actually a very popular spirit in the U.S., and it's there's a lot of economic activity related to mezcal now, especially as opposed to 50 years ago. So a federal institution in Mexico steps in and says, okay, well, we're gonna protect mezcal. We're gonna protect this tradition that has historically been very social and ecologically local process. We're going to protect it, but they come up with a lot of hoops to jump through and a lot of legal literacy necessary to call yourself a mezcal. And you have to work with this federal institution. So it turns out that back to the idea of institutional legibility, it turns out that most of the mezcal that is certified as quote unquote like federally approved mezcal that's sold in the United States is and it's surprise, surprise, it's an industrial product. Looks more like down here in the bottom right, and looks nothing like the people who make it for their villages, and looks nothing like the social product that it historically has been. So that's, I guess, like an example of an institution kind of overrunning this local community memory, um, that has been developed through time, and is a slow process, slowly changes. So these slow moving traditions, kind of get overrun very quickly by institutional processes. So I guess like how this, so far I haven't talked at all about, I guess, technology or computers or Ethereum or blockchains, but um, the, all, just as I, at the beginning, I mentioned that, place is super foundational to and memory passes through place, and people grow up in the same place as their parents. And, just as much as a physical place is important to creating, local traditions and memory, technology and people's tools are, I would say, almost just as important. I have this interesting. I think this quote is great, and I think is in the direction of what I'm saying. But culture's memory is constantly produced through and mediated by the technologies of memory. So, um, the tools that people use will create and assist their memory. So we need to, obviously we're using a tool to talk right now. We're using the internet to talk right now, um, and in relation to that idea is this idea of Conway's law, which is a little more specific. It's in the world of software development, but it describes the link between the communication structure and the systems they design. So you can't, you can't have a Microsoft can't design an open source uh, a tool to subvert Microsoft, basically. Or centralized governments can't produce local agency. They produce this one-way relationship. So when you think about our technology, we need to make it match this cyclic um, idea of, we need to make it match our idea of a community memory. So, and I'll just mention as an aside, this is, I guess, where I got the idea to call the series of essays community memory. But a bulletin board system was kind of like the first, like the precursor to the internet. So it's like physical terminals that people could use to talk to other physical terminals, um, uh, and they, were physically linked. This is, and people would host their BBS in their home, and their friends could come and use it. And so the first BBS actually in Berkeley was called Community Memory. So it was this, is a tool, but it wasn't depersonalizing, and it wasn't out of the context of place, and it wasn't like a black hole. It allowed people to relate to each other in person, in physical spaces. Um, so I like the spirit of that. So new tools for collaborative coordination. In general, relational models of sharing value, like cooperatives, the kind of thing that kind of we're all working towards, they're more organizationally burdensome. So the easier thing would just be, to buy some product from some guy who's selling it to you, not to work develop over the course of years to buy the same product from uh, work over the course of years to collaboratively make this tool. It's easier just to buy it. Um, so, but if these tools that we're making together aren't sufficiently learnable, then you're just going to have some other salesman or some other intermediary step in and take that process away from a community. So our tools need to be, easy to learn, easy to collaborate with. So I think that's definitely possible. And I have, there are fun ways of relating on the internet. I just saw that you can look it up, Froderick, but there's this example is this guy posted on TikTok that, like, there's a frog outside my house onto my fence. I'm going to give it a little house, and he just like put up this little plastic thing that he 3D printed, and then a lot of people in the comments collaboratively came on and said, basically it turned into a community of people co-designing this frog house. People got super into it and submitted their own designs or helped with the design, helped with the technical work, or just came up with ideas in general. So thing that because it was fun, it became collaborative, and that's, I think, an example of the spirit of what we should. I don't think the spirit of where I think we should be, how we should collaborate if we want people to stick around and continue to collaborate and do the work to have empathetic relationship in our economies. That they need to be accessible, basically. So why does crypto fit into this idea of building a community memory? Well, there's a lot of overlap. Ethereum itself is kind of like, its impetus was that in World of Warcraft, like, a specific item wasn't available to Vitalik, so he cried himself to sleep and said, like, if someone could take that away from me, then I need to build some place with more digital sovereignty, builds more agency, and that people can't censor my tools. So that's kind of obviously, and the foundations of cryptocurrency is Bitcoin, which is a uncensorable money. So that's kind of like there's a lot of overlap. And there's these attitudes of composability, openness. So culturally it fits. And then culturally, I also think there's there's a cultural polycentricity in terms of, the Ethereum does a lot of amazing things. And I think, kind of its goal is to be a mutable, permanent source of universal truth. Anyone can post to it, but it's a little bit less flexible for designing social systems. And so then there's kind of like the crowd of Cosmos or Celestia, that's like, we can design our own chains. So if you put those together, you can have I think all of those things are good. And having a local blockchain for your town or your neighborhood that runs on Cosmos can interoperate with, like, if you need a universal stable coin that runs on Ethereum. All of those things are, I think, appropriate for building a community memory. So action, this section is kind of just like some examples of the tools. I know I'm running up on time, but of like the specific tools that we can build. And my approach is, there's a lot of traditions in the world of localism that that can benefit from the interoperability, the uncensorable nature, the networkability of crypto. And so I don't think we need to build, some crazy tokenomics. I don't think we need to, make some convoluted meme coin that also, has some other use case. And I don't. I think we can just do some of the basic things that people have been thinking about for years, or decades, even before crypto, and we can put them on blockchains, and just that would be super helpful. So I guess like the very most basic thing is a digital identity system, and I don't mean like a centralized one where they put my United States ID on the internet, but kind of more in the sense of that identity has historically been locally constructed, and so if you have if you bring that kind of same sensibility to um, I'm going to build my identity through evidence of my relationships on the internet, and people like Gitcoin, Passport, and Lens are doing this. um, I think that's a good thing, and that these reputation systems that people are making a lot of good progress on lend a lot of credibility and like hardness to some of the other things that we can do, like voting, um, which becomes a lot more creative when it can be on chain. Um, so we have these traditions already in crypto of just like delegation or conviction voting, which is that voting is continuous, but if you leave your vote the same way over a period of years or months, then the weight increases. All these creative kind of ideas that people are experimenting with in the world of crypto, um, they become more available as these reputation systems kind of mature a little bit. And then if you have this more hard blockchain that can be trusted, maybe a local government can trust it for a few things, or trust it to keep some money on, or trust a small thing to be voted on by people experimenting in the city. If local governments can start to trust, or local organizations, neighborhoods can start to trust some of the things that are going on the blockchain, then you start to blur the lines between, just like in media, you blur the lines between, like a YouTuber and CNN, that, like that's getting a little more blurry. You could do the same thing with government, and you wouldn't have such a hard line distinction between like, here's the state government, here's the local municipality, and here's a neighborhood group, and those are completely separate things. But all of them are doing governance, and if you rely on some of these hard attributes of blockchains and people start to trust them, then I think those lines can get a little more blurry. And so there's one basic example of thing you could do is participatory budgeting, which is great. It's been done for a long time. It happens in New York City, but it's also pretty hard to administer. And it's not like a new city can just be like, yeah, we'll try it. It takes a lot of communication. It takes a lot of effort. But if you can get a little bit of the government money on chain, and if you start to trust some of these uh, the way that people are getting on chain with reputation systems, then you can start to do some participatory budgeting that you can trust has been done by people, and that's pretty exciting because it there's exactly that kind of stuff happening already. MakerDAO for years has had all of its finances completely auditable, transparent, and you can do the same thing with a city right now. You don't need to wait for infrastructure. You could do it as long as you have some public trust. Um, so I'll move past. We can come back and talk to about these if you want a little bit, but um, another one that I think just needs a little bit of love is, or another one that I think is totally possible today is, we have a few sites, a few kind of like commons for 3D printing and CNC design, that could be better managed, I think, with some of the blockchain infrastructure, with payment system, on-chain payment system, um, And so I'm excited to see some of that come online. And then obviously there's money, which I listen in on Scott Morris's emergency finance situation uh, talk. So he went into greater detail on all these forms of money that are possible on a blockchain. But the I think that both universal money and local money are good and can contribute to this sense of community memory. Um, Obviously we have lots of different experiments in universal money right now, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and DAI. But you also there's a consortium of banks. Traditionally, money, the creation of the money supply is done by local banks. So there's a consortium of banks calling themselves USDF that's proposing they literally create money. They create this stable coin based on member um, the deposits in member banks. So there's lots of different experiments in terms of universal money that I think are very interesting. But I also think local money is where probably blockchains are going to be that's the most exciting use case, I think, personally. So Scott mentioned this, but probably the mutual credit is the direction that I'm most excited about. So if you have obligation clearing, you basically just create a map of economic relationships, and you can offset people's invoices. If you have these account balances that settle at the end of a term, then before the end of the term, you can take a look at the entire map and offset the the debt between people, and so you reduce the need for cash in a system by up to 50%. If so, that's called obligation clearing. Mutual credit is if people extend them each other beyond the term, like beyond the month where the debt's clear. If you extend some credit to the system, each individual extends some credit, and they say, okay, I don't need to be fully paid back exactly at the end of every month, but maybe at the end of 3 months, I do. So within that 3 month period, if you extend some credit to the network that you're participating in, then you can reduce the need for cash by 50%. So you hit 50% less money changes hands. You basically created that money out of thin air, just in the relationships between those economic actors. I think that's super exciting. And then so Serafu or people like guys at grassroots economics, they're doing that kind of on a small scale in villages on the ground in Kenya and other places in Africa. And then if anyone's familiar with Cycles, that's new infrastructure being built on Cosmos by Ethan Buckman, which is, they're building it right now. So there's not a ton of it's not on the ground working, but these are blockchain systems for local money that can work pretty soon here, and I find that extremely exciting. But okay, so I guess I'll end it there. But my general attitude, I guess, is how can we start to build our community memory, and how can we become less dependent on distant institutions? And I don't think it's like which has been suggested a lot in the crypto world and network state world, but I don't think it's fleeing to new communities or creating some new city outside of our home places. And I don't think it's necessarily even that we can heal like the U.S. federal government. I'm not sure that's going to happen, but we can build these parallel systems based on this new emerging infrastructure, blockchain infrastructure, and Ethereum. And if we build them to be relational and we build them to stand the test of time, then hopefully we can build a community memory that is more resilient than whatever institutions we're relying on today. Okay, I guess I'll stop sharing or yep. All right, sorry, I just I talked for like an hour straight, but I would love to hear any questions or feedback or anything.
Sweet. I have two things to say. First, just quickly, are you familiar with Kevin A. Carson?
Kevin A. Carson?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so.
Cool. Okay,
but I guess
cool.
I should. Is that a person I should look up or?
Yeah, he has a book called The Desktop Regulatory State, and a book called The Homebrew Industrial Revolution. It's just I'm just curious because the sort of broad frame that you're laying out is one that me and Josh and Ben, for example, are sort of on the same page with. Cool, and for us, it's very much, or for me, it was informed by his work that sort of covers almost all the topics you mentioned, like almost in the same order. So,
oh, that's funny. No, that's funny. Yeah, but I have noticed, there's like a lot of people on the same beat, kind of. That's great. Okay, I'll check them out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm curious if there's any like if these feel like threads that you've woven together just in a process of discovery, or if there's a meta thinker that is sort of pointed in these different directions. Like, in other words, thinking about like mutual credit and CNC machines in the same breath is for me like a very specific type of frame. Is that that you've just been?
Yeah, I just I mean, yeah. So the writing was kind of I don't think there's anyone like, I guess, that I picked up the Ethereum stuff. I've just kind of been around Ethereum for a while. Like I mentioned MakerDAO, like I just was, I got interested in MakerDAO in like 2017, and I was in there, they called it Rocket Chat before they had a Discord, like just learning from those guys. But so the technology, like the Ethereum side of it, or even just the technology angle, I think is more like me just learning iteratively. But a huge fan of Eleanor Ostrom. I'm a big fan of Wendell Berry. So there's a lot of the people that I mentioned, and or had quotes from. I definitely didn't pull it all out of my ass. It's a lot of influence of like the beginning parts, but the way, like I'm thinking of relating it to technology, I think is I hadn't read someone that was like had done it exactly like that, but there's a ton, like I said, there's a ton of people kind of in, as evidenced by this talk series, like there's kind of on the same thread here. So I think to me, that's evidence of like we're onto something, is if people are having similar ideas. But yeah, I'll look Kevin A. Carson, I'll look it up.
Yeah, and I want other people to ask questions, but just to throw in also that that thinking about Michael Levin and James, I mean, honestly, it's like the talk was funny because it's just bringing up diverse thinkers that that are like, I'm obsessed with all of them, but I haven't seen Michael Levin, and Michael Levin and James Scott sort of thought of in the same breath is interesting. Levin has this idea of your cognitive light cone. When he's thinking about speaking about biology, basically. So for your dog isn't like no matter what like how much like sort of learning or training, your dog will never care about what's happening 3 blocks away 2 weeks from now. That's the cognitive cone.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, it thought with James Scott, it's almost there's this phenomenon where animals like develop more and more sort of like unexpected like cognitive capacities that sort of happen under the right conditions. Yeah. And it seems clear to me that there's something about this kind of brings in Graeber too, that there's something about like atmospheres of violence, or atmospheres of whatever, just call it oppressive atmospheres, that mean that creatures will, that in other words, you can manufacture produce subjects that have limited cognitive light cones, under what James Scott would call the synoptic legibility of the state, right? But under more like permissive or peaceful atmospheres, like the ability of cognitive light cones like expand and sort of counteract that psychic numbing that you're talking about. There's
yeah, that's interesting.
In there, but I know there's a third factor, which is the sort of brute logistical reality of like you said, like the amount of care that you can extend, and the sort of the limits of like the way that people can signal with each other.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. So hopefully some of this infrastructure can like fight that a little bit, because it's like for the foreseeable future, it's like always going to be easier to just order something on Amazon, So, but hopefully, yeah, some of this crypto infrastructure can make it easier, and people are making the ideas more transferable. Like, so maybe one group of people does do the hardest part, but then every time it's relayed or forked, it gets a little easier for someone else.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like we do have. It was kind of an open question as I was watching your talk, but now that you're talking, like, it feels like we do have the technological infrastructure to sort of expand our psychic, or our cognitive light cones, or break the numbing. But it's just a matter of the sort of I don't really love this phrase, but the consciousness shift of escape the synoptic legibility of the state, and the infrastructure for expanding your cognitive light cone almost infinitely is all waiting for us. But we just it's just a matter of if as a society we're prepared to like leap into that project.
Right. Yeah, which is kind of why the examples I was thinking of that are practical and most in reach are, like ideas that they're not crypto ideas. There's just things that we can do using crypto infrastructure, but you can have a community land trust that's managed on chain, but there's lots of people that want to do a community land trust that aren't like degens, but so that's the easiest, like the most accessible like path forward, I think, rather than trying to like educate everyone on like the vocabulary of crypto Twitter or something. But anyone else have any observations? But thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to say something about what I wrote, and it was fun to watch all the other, not all the other talks. I was out of town for a couple weeks, but the past like week and a half, I've been on a lot of them, and you put together a great little calendar here.
Really, really awesome talk. Then I think the deck is was actually shared in the chat.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I put it in the Telegram, but I'll send it right here. It should be like you should be able to see it when you click on it. It should be the sharing permission should be broad, but let me know if you can't see it. Yeah, so okay, that's another thing to mention if you are clicking on these slides, that like a lot of this stuff there's a lot of links, like these blue the blue words in here are links if you do want to follow any of the ideas. Cool.
Yeah, and actually also his newest book on the state is gets into the sort of the parallelism that you were invoking.
Well. Yeah, I think that's the way. I watch this. I'll send it in here because I really like it. Let me find it. This is just a video I saw a long time ago, but it's kind of like where in this video they're running by it's in outside of San Francisco, I think, like a small town, but it has, it's kind of like a restrictive development environment. And so this guy's running through like all the ways basically like he got around all the development restrictions, just like borderline legally, and just talking about like generally how there's a lot of like good philosophical stuff about not fighting the state, but subverting it,
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if maybe you commented on it, but the interview with Mark Lakeman,
I liked it. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list. I want to read it.
I mean, it's right there with absolutely everything you're talking about. But I really like this. I've been having these back and forth conversations with my sister, and I'm very much a pacifist and a parallelist, and totally into. But for anybody listening, but Lakeman talks a lot about what do you call it, like provoking confrontations. So he you can check it out in the interview, but the point is that they did this intersection sort of painting and installed some benches and stuff like this. This community, and of course like they came and said like this is all illegal, and it ended up opening up this conversation about the sort of the stifling regulatory restrictions that mean that this administrative legibility that you're talking about like prohibits sort of spontaneous community stuff, but also the sense of place was what he kept on returning to. But there's something about that mix between place and that rootedness in place actually like necessarily ends up at a sort of provocative confrontation with administrative. Anyways.
Right. Yeah, and I think rooted and you have a strong connection to place. That's the only way you can build like this generational memory. And you can't you're not going to do that if you live somewhere different than your parents, and your parents your kids live somewhere different than you, and you're going to forget a lot of stuff along the way. Which is kind of why that's my opposition to like the network state ideas in general, is like you can't you can't build a culture apart from a place. I don't think that's you can't build a sustainable culture that way, which is hard. Like, I don't know, I'm just interested to see how it all plays out, because all of our culture is on the internet now. But that's, I think, partially why it like goes away so quickly. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think about Mark Lakeman and these permaculture guys. Or a lot of permaculture folks that I've spoken to, like a lot of it tends to end up going towards this thing about right living, and it's like cool, right living, and then and then right living kind of turns into like like your wife and your kid and you got a peach in your hand, and it's just and it starts to sound very trad. And I'm interested in like how cities have senses of intergenerational place that aren't necessarily like don't involve some idea of the nuclear family or some like nostalgia for a certain type of family structure, but are kind of like the city has a memory, there was
which I think is definitely possible. That's kind of like the so the book Palaces for the People that I mentioned on social infrastructure. That's kind of like the idea basically, is that like you can have like this infrastructure that that produces the social environment by way of like, if you have a lot of street vendors and you have a shaded sidewalk and you have a good library, then you have like even individuals can come participate in that that culture and that place, and that that culture and that cultural memory stays with the place, even if, like families cycle through the place, or, or you're just like a single person who moves in from across the country. You can adopt the culture of that place based on like the infrastructure that makes it more social. Yeah, so I think that is more possible in cities for sure, because you can have this social infrastructure in ways that you can't as much. I mean, you can still have like the store, the general store on Main Street in a rural place, and that can be like a social place. But there's just more social infrastructure in a city. This is denser.
Yeah, I think a lot about clubs that have one particular really really intense subculture association, but the rest of the community is like, it's like some punk club from 1988, and it's like going to be replaced by Walmart, and a bunch, some punk kids are like, I really have memories of that club, but some other, there's something about it's like pluralism is also fragmented. Like cities are really pluralistic, but they're also in some respect kind of fragmented, and that means
right.
that one person's sense of place and memory is different from others.
Totally, yeah. Especially in like really huge cities, you don't have like, everyone who walks by that punk venue is not like, oh, we gotta. That's been there for decades, and I care about it, and it has this specific meaning to me. Like, yeah, there's a lot of in a big city that there's less. It's not like everyone in the city feels connected at all.
Kind of goes to the question about, internet localities, like that you were pointing to, like what does it mean to like develop a sense of place in a non-place?
Right, yeah. I mean, that definitely is the case. Like there are lots of, I mean, like there's just personal example, like a group chat that I've been in for years now, full of people I've never met, just know from like crypto stuff on Discord. And there's definitely like a sense of place and a culture there, but it would be a lot more powerful if there was like some physical representation, or like we regularly met at a specific place, or like there's some tie to the physical. I think that's important for like a really resilient community, because I've been in this chat like, let's say 5 or 6 years now, but I fully expect it not to exist at some point. But if you're going to build somewhere resilient, I think you have to include some element of place. But I don't think we're going to do that in that chat.
Yeah, there's something there. That's a really cool thing to think about, is that mix between just that horizon around placemaking, pluralism, and then these different types of localism and contextual localism versus geographical localism.
Right. Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. Amazing talk.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for hosting me. I know it was, like I said, I never have presented on those ideas. So my brain wanted to spend 3 hours, but we've fit it into one, I guess.
It was tight. I mean, written that. So.
Yeah. Thanks. Okay, guys. Thanks for attending.
Thank you much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.